Okay, this is the podcast for AP Biology, the respiratory system. Basically, the respiratory system is taking in the oxygen and getting rid of the carbon dioxide. There are 6 different methods for this process. Basic diffusion, gills, trachea, air sacs, book lungs, and then when we have regular lungs. So we're going to go through each one of these. For diffusion, this happens in single-celled organisms. Obviously, because they're doing diffusion, these organisms are small. Respiratory surfaces will increase surface area for gas exchange. They are covered with moist cells. Sponges and jellyfish do diffusion. They take gases in directly from the water. Flatworms and earthworms like annelids use outer surface for gas exchange. All right, next one is gills. Gills are in arthropods, fish and amphibians. They contain blood vessels within a thin epithelial layer. They can be external or internal. Water actually flows over the gills in one direction and blood flows in the opposite direction. This is called countercurrent exchange or countercurrent flow, and this is how they are able to get their oxygen transfer and maximize it. So here's a picture of the blood flow going in one direction and the water flow going in the other direction, and this occurs over the gills. Here's the gills, there's an operculum, the gills are inside there. Trachea. Trachea is a series of tubes that carry air directly to cells for gas exchange. The openings that they have to the outside of their body are called spiracles, and they lead to the trachea and they branch into smaller tubes called tracheoles. The trachea will not function well in animals who are really long. An example of an organism that has trachea is the grasshopper. And so you can see these are your trachea, and they're connected to the spiracles, and the spiracle is actually a hole on the outside of their body, so the air can directly come in and do the gas exchange. Air sacs are found as tiny sacs off a larger breathing tubes, the trachea of insects, or on the extensions of lungs in birds. They serve to increase respiratory efficiency by providing a larger surface area for gas exchange. So for example, here is the lungs, which we'll be getting to, and they're just basically extensions off the lungs that just gives them more surface area for gas exchange. These are the air sacs. Next one are book lungs. This is a terrestrial respiratory organ in spiders and scorpions. Each book lung consists of hollow, flat plates. The air bathes the outer surface of the plates, and blood will circulate within them, and that allows for the gas exchange. In most species, adequate gas exchange occurs without any muscle movement to ventilate the lung. So here's a picture of book lungs. This is a spider, and there are the book lungs right there. Okay. All right, and now we're going to get into ours. The lungs. Oxygen is taken into the body, and obviously carbon dioxide is breathed out. Lungs are made of spongy, elastic tissue that will stretch and constrict as we breathe. The airways that bring air into the lungs, which is the trachea and the bronchi, are made of smooth muscle and cartilage, and that allows the airways to constrict and expand. Where the air goes, here's the flow. As you breathe air in through your nose or your mouth, it will go past the epiglottis and then into your trachea. It continues down the trachea through your vocal cords, in the larynx, until it reaches the lungs, which is the first part, the bronchi. From the bronchi, air will pass into each lung, right side and left side. The air then flows narrower into narrower tubes called bronchioles, and then eventually will reach the alveoli. We have a diagram later to label. What happens next? Within each alveoli, the oxygen concentration is very high because the oxygen just got there. So the oxygen passes or diffuses across this membrane into the pulmonary capillary. At the beginning of the pulmonary capillary, there's hemoglobin in the red blood cells, and that has carbon dioxide bound to it and very little oxygen. So the oxygen will then bind to hemoglobin, and the carbon dioxide is released. It is released from sodium bicarbonate that's dissolved in the blood of the pulmonary capillary. So there's some chemical reactions occurring. The concentration of carbon dioxide is then high in the pulmonary capillary, so carbon dioxide will leave the alveoli when you exhale, and the oxygen will then return to the heart. So the purpose of breathing is to keep the oxygen concentration high and the carbon dioxide concentration low so that gas exchange can occur. Here's our diagram. So here's your nose, your mouth, your epiglottis, which the air passes through, your trachea, and then eventually we'll reach the lungs. First, the body breathes in the air, which is sucked through the nose or mouth and down through the windpipe, which is the trachea. The trachea is a pipe shaped by rings of cartilage. We saw that with the pig. It divides into two tubes called the bronchi, which you can barely see, but they're right there. These carry the air into the lung. Here's our lungs. Inside the lung, and here's the bronchi, okay, and here's your trachea. Epiglottis is up there. Inside the lung, the tubes divide into smaller and smaller tubes called bronchioles. So within these tubes, there's smaller tubes, and these are the bronchioles. At the ends of each bronchiole, you can see they look like grapes. Those are the alveoli, and they're air sacs, they call them, or alveoli. Within the alveoli, there are capillaries, which are small blood vessels, and they're wrapped around the alveoli. The walls are so thin and close to each other that the air can just diffuse right through. So oxygen is diffusing in, carbon dioxide is diffusing out, and then is removed from the body as we breathe out. Okay. Breathing in and out, there's also a diaphragm involved. Here's your diaphragm. You saw that with the pig. It's below the lungs. The diaphragm is actually a muscle. It controls the breathing process. As the diaphragm flattens, it causes the chest to expand, and air is sucked into the lungs. Just breathe in. You'll feel that. When the diaphragm relaxes, the chest collapses, and the air is forced out. Diseases of the respiratory system. First one is asthma. The bronchioles are constricted. That reduces the size of the airways. It cuts down on the flow of air and makes the respiratory muscles work harder. Next one is emphysema. The lungs actually become stiff with fibers and become less elastic, which increases the work of the respiratory muscles. Bronchitis is when the airways become inflamed and narrow. It restricts the flow of air and increases the work of the respiratory muscles. Next one is apnea. Breathing will slow or stop under a variety of conditions. There are many types of apnea, and they're usually caused by problems in the respiratory centers of the brain. Smoke inhalation. Smoke particles will coat the alveoli, and that coating will prevent the exchange of gases. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide will bind to hemoglobin more than oxygen or carbon dioxide, and so obviously that minimizes the delivery of oxygen to the tissues of the body, including the brain, the heart, and the muscles. Fun facts, you can read all these. I believe they're all in there. Your lungs contain almost 1,500 miles of airways, 300 million alveoli. Every minute you breathe in 13 pints of air. People tend to get more colds in the winter because we're indoors more often and are close proximity to other people. When people sneeze, cough, and even breathe, germs go flying. So, and then I just put in some questions that you might have thought of when you were little and you never really understood. Maybe this will help you understand: why do I yawn? Why do I sneeze? What causes hiccups? And a couple other fun facts. And why can't we breathe underwater? So you can read through those at your leisure, and that finishes